Is Bangladesh truly the world's worst country? A provocative question that's been floating around, casting a shadow of negativity and skepticism. Bangladesh, a nation often painted with broad strokes of poverty, corruption, and natural disasters. A country weighed down by stereotypes that seem to color the world's perception. But amidst this sea of assumptions and preconceived notions, one begs to ask, how much of this is reality, and how much is mere conjecture? But how much truth is there in these claims? Let's dive in and find out. To answer this question, we need to debunk some common misconceptions. Let's start with the economy. Bangladesh is often stereotyped as a poor country, but did you know that it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world? According to the World Bank, Bangladesh has maintained an average growth rate of over 6% for the past decade. That's a figure many developed countries would envy. Now let's talk about education. There's a misconception that Bangladesh has a poor education system. However, the reality is quite different. The literacy rate has soared to nearly 73%, a significant leap from just about 45% 2 decades ago. The country has also made significant strides in gender parity in education, with girls now outnumbering boys in primary and secondary schools. And then there's the rich cultural heritage of Bangladesh that often gets overlooked. Bangladesh is a melting pot of diverse cultures, traditions, and festivals, with a vibrant art scene. Its literature and music have a deep-rooted history that dates back centuries. The Bangla language, the national language of Bangladesh, is the 7th most spoken language in the world. Bangladesh is also home to the world's largest mangrove forest, the Sundarbans, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Its unique wildlife includes the majestic Royal Bengal tiger. The country's natural beauty is complemented by its architectural marvels, such as the 60-dome mosque, another UNESCO World Heritage Site. In terms of human development, Bangladesh is a global role model for its remarkable achievements in health and gender equality. The country has significantly reduced child mortality rates and improved maternal health, while women's participation in the workforce has increased substantially. So, as you see, the narrative often painted about Bangladesh being the world's worst country is far from the truth. It's a country that's thriving, improving, and defying odds. So, as we can see, these stereotypes don't hold up under scrutiny. Now let's delve deeper into the real Bangladesh. A land of vibrancy and resilience, Bangladesh is a country that has been on a constant journey of growth and transformation. It is a nation that has been consistently defying odds and emerging stronger, making its own mark on the global stage. The heart of Bangladesh's success lies in its rapidly growing economy. It is one of the world's fastest growing economies, with a growth rate that has consistently outpaced global averages. This economic dynamism is fueled by a robust textile industry, burgeoning information and technology sectors, and an enterprising agricultural sector. But Bangladesh's accomplishments extend beyond economic growth. It's a nation rich in cultural heritage, a tapestry of centuries-old traditions and modern influences. From the melodic tunes of the Bauls, the wandering minstrels, to the colorful celebrations of Pohela Boishakh, the Bengali New Year, Bangladesh's cultural landscape is as diverse as it is vibrant. Equally remarkable is the resilience of the Bangladeshis themselves. They are a people who have weathered natural disasters, political upheavals, and economic challenges with an indomitable spirit. It's this resilience that has enabled the country to make significant strides in areas like education, health, and gender equality. Bangladesh has achieved near universal primary school enrollment, and it has made impressive strides in reducing child and maternal mortality rates. It's also a global leader in gender parity in education and politics, with women playing prominent roles in all spheres of life. Another feather in Bangladesh's cap is its achievements in the field of climate change adaptation. Recognized as one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, Bangladesh has pioneered innovative strategies to cope with these challenges, becoming a model for other countries. But perhaps the most compelling testament to Bangladesh's progress is its people. Warm, welcoming, and hardworking, the people of Bangladesh are the true driving force behind the country's success. Clearly, Bangladesh is far from being the world's worst country. It's a nation that's constantly evolving, overcoming obstacles, and marching towards a brighter future. It's a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of cultural heritage, and the potential of human spirit. However, like any other nation, Bangladesh does face challenges. The journey of progress is not a smooth one, and it's marked by obstacles that need to be overcome. One of the most pressing challenges is climate change. Bangladesh, with its low-lying geography and reliance on agriculture, is particularly vulnerable to the effects of global warming. Rising sea levels and increased frequency of natural disasters pose a threat to the livelihoods of millions. Poverty is another hurdle. Despite substantial progress in reducing poverty over the last couple of decades, there still remains a significant portion of the population living under the poverty line. The government, along with various NGOs, continues to work tirelessly to uplift these individuals and provide them with better opportunities. Political instability can also be a stumbling block. While the country has had periods of political unrest in the past, it's important to note that political turbulence is something that nations worldwide grapple with. It's a global challenge, not a Bangladesh-exclusive issue. These challenges, while significant, are not insurmountable. They require attention, effort, and global cooperation. They don't define Bangladesh, but rather underline the shared human endeavor of overcoming adversity. Countries around the world face their own unique set of challenges, and Bangladesh is no exception. These challenges don't make Bangladesh the world's worst country. Instead, they make it a country that, like any other, is striving to overcome its problems. So, what can you do to help change the narrative about Bangladesh? It's time to take a step forward. It's time to challenge the status quo. The power to reshape the perception of Bangladesh lies in your hands. How, you ask? By spreading this message. Share this video far and wide because knowledge is power. Let's challenge the stereotypes, break the misconceptions, and shed light on the real Bangladesh. If you've learned something new today, pass it on. Educate your friends, your family, your colleagues. Open their eyes to the vibrant culture, the warm hospitality, the relentless spirit of Bangladesh. And it doesn't stop there. Support Bangladesh in overcoming its challenges. Reach out to organizations working in the region. Offer your skills, your time, or your resources. Remember, every voice counts in changing perceptions. So go ahead, share this video, and help change the narrative about Bangladesh.